Welcome to the Good Eggs of History podcast. Here we explore the more unknown historical rule breakers, the rebels, the brave, and the bonkers. I'm Hannah Shekel, and I'll take you on a journey to discover these absolute badasses. As everything is Jubilee related at the moment, I thought we might take a little trip to explore monarchs who you might not know much about, and who led kind of unexpected lives. There have been 61 monarchs across a period of 1,200 years, so there might be a couple you've not heard of before. Our first monarch is Edward II. He was born in 1284 in Carnarvon Castle in Wales, and he became tall, handsome, and very much a fit specimen of a man, apparently. He loved horse breeding and rowing, and had a pet lion and camel. Not sure if they got on or not. Edward also loved the arts, and he and his queen Isabella were entertained by 54 naked dancers at the French courts when they visited. Ooh la la indeed. What's notable about Edward is that he was strongly rumoured to be gay. And don't forget, while being homosexual didn't carry a death penalty, that came in 1533, it was definitely taboo and was heavily punished by mutilation or worse, depending where you lived in Europe. He spent most of his time with the handsome young men of his court, in particular Piers Gaveston. The author of Edward II, Unconventional King, Catherine Warner, said, "It's very obvious from Edward's behaviour that he was quite obsessed with Gaveston." Edward gave him title of Earl of Cornwall, which was unheard of for somebody of relatively low status like Piers. The king lavished attention and favour on him, much to the displeasure of the rest of his court, who repeatedly asked for his exile. The playwright Christopher Marlowe, who you may also have heard of, wrote Edward II in the 16th century, and made much of their relationship, portraying it as decidedly homoerotic. In it, Marlowe writes Edward as referring to Piers as "my sweet Gaveston," claiming that the Earl loves him more than all the world. Unfortunately, Piers was eventually isolated by the other angry nobles, executed, and the king was never the same again. However, Edward had a similarly troubled relationship with Hugh Despenser, who again was lavished with titles, gifts, and affection, and chroniclers of the time referred to him as a second king. After Hugh managed to separate Queen Isabella from her children, she called on the nobles to exact revenge, which they did. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered, and this was the metaphorical straw that broke the camel's back. Edward was pressured to abdicate the throne, which was then taken by his son, also called Edward. It's believed Edward II was murdered in 1327. A difficult reign, plagued by rumour, scandal, and death. Elizabeth II would never. I'm cheating a little with our second monarch. She was actually never crowned Queen of England. Lady of the Mercians, and I apologise for pronunciation here, but Anglo-Saxon English is not my best. Ethelfled. She left a legacy that could not be extinguished, despite being overshadowed by the men in her life. What a surprise. She laid the foundations of what England would become. She was the daughter of Alfred the Great, him of the allegedly burnt cakes, and grew up in a country of warring kingdoms, beset by Viking invasions. She married Ethelred, which strengthened alliances with Wessex, another kingdom resisting the Vikings. In Mercia, women were permitted to take part in courtly life and administration, and Ethelfled was given the same education as her brothers. She was an exceptional negotiator, brokering peace treaties in person with Vikings. However, the Vikings did decide to attack Mercia, but Ethelfled and her brother Edward, who was Alfred's successor, gathered their forces, and at the Battle of Wednesfield they struck a decisive victory, shifting the balance of power in their favour. In 911, Ethelred died, and the nobles declared that Ethelfled should be proclaimed Lady of the Mercians and rule in her own right. And actually, she didn't remarry, which was unusual. This may have been politically motivated, though literature at the time thought a celibate woman was more manly and serious. She put in a programme of works to fortify over half a dozen towns, protecting them against future invasions. She then struck a blow into Viking territory, seizing the town of Seergate. They counterattacked in Mercia, but they were successfully repelled, as were further Viking and also Welsh raids. She captured the Viking stronghold of Derby, and then the following year, Leicester surrendered to her rule. Chronicles of the time, strangely particularly Welsh and Irish ones, describe her in glowing terms, such as famosissima regina Saxonum, renowned Saxon queen. She was described by the 12th century poet Ian Huntington as a queen by title, but in deeds a king. Everything she did paved the way for England to become a united country under one ruler. She also passed rule down to her daughter, Elfwin, who was also unmarried. This was a unique event at the time in the land, and was a clear sign of the power and the respect that she had. What a badass. Lastly, we're finishing off with a bit of a royal fail, King James I. To tie in with our first story, he was also gay, but more openly so. One day he became besotted with George Villiers, who is described by Bishop Godfrey Goodman as the handsomest bodied man in all of England. Because a bishop would know, right? However, the king's existing boyfriend, Robert Carr, wasn't massively keen on this. James gave Villiers a title, and he then began interfering in the king's foreign affairs. In 1623, Villiers took the king's son to Spain with the intention of securing a bride for him as a gesture of peace. However, Villiers managed to behave so crassly that the Spanish actually asked James to execute him on his return to England. Villiers then declared war on Spain himself when he returned, though the king's advisers quashed that. As time went on, James's health declined, so he became reliant on Villiers and on his son, and he replaced his parliament with one that would approve war in Spain. So eventually, they sailed to Spain with the intention of capturing Spanish ships returning from the Americas, laden with goods. But they managed not to pack enough food and drink, so many ships actually had to turn back to England. The ones that remained sailed into the port of Cadiz, who sensibly had sent all their ships away when they saw the English coming very slowly. The English captured the undefended and long-abandoned Fort Puntal, which had no supplies or anything useful, except for wine, which they then got drunk on. Then the Spanish arrived, and they didn't even need to use their guns on the men, just swords, and managed to kill around 1,000 men because the English were simply too drunk. They were forced to sail back to England, tail between their legs. They stopped off in Ireland, and when they arrived in Galway, their shrunken, emaciated bodies scared the locals so much that the town gates were shut to them, and near Plymouth, the sailors were tipping corpses of their companions into the sea. The expedition cost the crown a lot of money and failed entirely. As well as being tragic, that's pretty embarrassing. While the history of monarchs is usually taught in a very dry way, at the end of the day, they are just people and prone to as many successes and failings as the rest of us. Just maybe with a bit more capital behind them than you or I. Thank you for listening. I'm Hannah Sheckle. If you'd like to join in the conversation and see photos and bonus info, join me on Instagram at Hannah Sheckle, Hotel Alpha November November Alpha Hotel, Sierra Hotel Echo Kilo Lima Echo. I love me some NATO alphabet. Or on Facebook at Good Eggs of History for everything else. Please join me next time to enjoy the next Good Egg.